When you do a vow of poverty, 100% of the money you make from anything relating to your ministry designated from that religious entity, 100% of it is tax exempt. Whenever you have anything that is not form bound, like how the 508 is created and how other things are created, such as the vow of poverty and the pledge card and things like that, those are the best when you function outside of form bound exemptions. And then they affirm that you don't have to fill out any name of particular form 40, 29, 68, blah, blah, blah. Just create an affidavit and create a proper record. Or you're standing there in the middle of the street, turn a crackhead, Jesus will save you, and just love one another because you know there's some childhood stuff going on with them that they're trying to relieve. The reason why you see some people stick onto religion so much, like the Federalists, like the Amish, like the Jews, like some Hindu Indians, like some quote unquote Arabs, it's because they know these things exist this way and they can effectively remain outside the system while the system still benefits them. This is what I mean when I say the system is designed perfectly, because it is designed to benefit. The tax code provides tax exempt status to the minister's earning only when the ministers earn the income as an aid. As you go through life, you would realize the inevitability of self-sufficiency. And you will see that the system that is designed to benefit you has an expectation that you ought to be self-sufficient, or that you are already self-sufficient. One of those is the issue of being dinged. Publication 517, IRS, Social Security, and other information for members of the clergy and religious worker. The term is vow of poverty on the third page. Coverage of members of the clergy. The services you perform in the exercise of your ministry. Ministry is basically anything that aligns with your religious instructions and belief. And the ministry is never restricted to anything you do under the religious entity. It can be any affairs in your life. The services you perform in the exercise of your ministry, and it can be your lifestyle, of the duties required by a religious order. This phrase is letting you know that that religious entity has to assign you to perform those ministries outside of the immediate environment of worship, or the immediate environment of gathering, or the immediate environment of whatever activity in that particular religious entity or religious order. There has to be a document that will say so-and-so man is to do so-and-so as part of the ministry relating to fill in the blank. Which now brings into this conversation those who are employed and they don't want to qualify for taxation for religious purpose because their religious entity has assigned them to perform ministries. And the earnings from that regular employment will go into the religious entity. And because it's going into the religious entity, the personal man does not qualify for dinging. But let's keep on reading. The services you perform in the exercise of your ministry, of the duties required by a religious order, that is one very important document, or of your profession as a Christian Science practitioner or reader, are covered by Social Security and Medicare under SECA. SECA is self-employment tax in place of the federal insurance tax. In other words, if you are an employee of a religious entity, self-employment tax is applied, no different than an independent contractor. So independent contractors don't get charged FICA. A good amount of them get charged SECA. And that same classification of self-employment is what is perceived if you are an employee of a religious entity. And this fact of applicability of types of tax is very important. Remember how we began this video when we reminded ourselves of the importance of self-sufficiency. A child who crawls eventually learns to walk himself without people holding him physically, and then runs from his immediate family to create his. The same applies in the realm of monies. And that's the general expectation. So you can already see a trail of that, whereby SECA, the self-employment type of tax in place of FICA, is what is applied to members of a religious order or religious entity. Your earning for these ministry services, which is defined later, are subject to self-employment tax. Your earnings from these ministry services are subject to self-employment tax unless one of the following apply. So now, since an employee of a religious entity engaging in ministries, in-house or outside, is classified as self-employment, therefore self-employment tax applies. But there are exceptions whereby even that self-employment tax can be alleviated. And this is how. One, you are a member of a religious order who has taken a vow of poverty. That's the second document. The first document is you have to have a minute or a resolution from the 508 religious entity saying, hey, you are to perform such and such duties with such and such work that you're doing outside of here as a part of your ministry, or the ministry must be part of your life regardless of what work you're doing. That's one document. Very important. Not one or the other, but both. Two is you must take a vow of poverty, meaning you now yourself say, you know what, given that my ministry drips through the cracks of different rooms in my life, I'm so dedicated and devoted to it that all that money now goes to the entity that is charging me with this ministry. Two documents. One that charges you to engage in the ministry everywhere else, not that you created, the entity creates it, you sign off to it, and another member of that entity sign off to it. Not that you created, the entity creates it, you sign off to it, and another member of that entity sign off to it. Not that you created, the entity creates it, you sign off to it, and another member of that entity sign off to it. And then you must take a vow of poverty to affirm or in a way accept that ministry. And the evidence that you've accepted that ministry is called a vow of poverty that takes all that money from that other part of your life into the religious entity that assigned you to that ministry. Are you seeing what's going on? Therefore, you will not qualify for the self-employment tax, which naturally applies to employees of a religious entity. Now, they show other requirements here, but that's not what we're focusing on, so we'll leave it be. Now, what is defined as ministerial service that's applicable even outside of that religious gathering of yours? Page 4, the same document. Ministerial services. Ministerial services in general are the services you perform in the exercise of your ministry and the exercise of your duties as required by a religious order. The first document shows so, which assigns you to engage in ministries, or in the exercise of your profession as a Christian Science practitioner or a reader, as some other type of organization. Income you receive for performing ministerial services is subject to self-employment tax unless, which we've just read, unless you have an exemption, which is you have taken the vow of poverty, as explained later. Even if you have an exemption, only the income, this is a very important caveat, because it is easy to get carried away when you start seeing these things that sound very good. And I'm here to mainly emphasize and highlight the caveats that has broke many people trying to use this method so that you won't fall victim to it also. So listen very carefully. Even if you have an exemption, comma, only the income you receive from performing ministerial service is exempt. The exemption does not apply to any other income. That is to say, whenever the religious entity creates a document that assigns you to engage in ministerial duty, the verbiage must be all-inclusive in any aspect of life where there is an assumption that monies will be made. Don't restrict it. There's a case law that we're going to read whereby the man screwed up by restricting the language of the type of income to be made or the type of amount relating to him and that religious entity. And as we've shown in many YouTube videos, when it comes to anything, there is the standard, there's a test, and there's the element. I will summarize it in a document and attach it with this course or this particular video of the course, but we'll nonetheless go over it here. And those are derived from a case law. So everything that I'm telling you is possible one way or the other. I will show you the caveat, how it's done right and how it's not done right. See, in this video right here, I showed you how to remove a specific amount rather than 100% of it from your work. See, the reason why I showed that publicly is because that is less scrutinized. When you do a vow of poverty, 100% of the money you make from anything relating to your ministry designated from that religious entity, 100% of it is tax exempt. But if you've noticed, there's a particular type of tax that's repeated over and over, which is self-employment tax. That is to say, when it comes to the matter of independence and how the system works and who it favors. If you are a W-2 employee, vow of poverty will not work for you. That is the bar that was placed by IRS. When I made that video thumbnail just showing about how not to get taxed at work, I knew most people are not self-employed. And that's all right. It's not the end of the world. I know people who are making 400K plus as a regular W-2 employee, albeit they get taxed, most of those, compared to others that I know that are self-employed, not even making half of that. So a W-2 employee does not insinuate that you're not financially stable. But what applies to most people realistically is that most people are W-2 employees. That's why I made that video rather than showing the vow of poverty. Now, in this course, I'm showing that if you are self-employed one way or the other, vow of poverty applies to you instead of a certain percentage being removed from your paycheck. So say you make a paycheck in a month that's 10K. Out of that 10K, you can only take a certain percentage off, as I've shown in that video. But if you're not a W-2 employee and you are self-employed, independent contractor, subcontractor, meaning someone did not put you on their payroll as one of their employees and you're independently coming and providing a service for them, and you have been assigned by a religious entity that service being provided to anyone else is part of your ministry, either through your behavior or through the way you deal with humans, whatever your mission goal is that's been written down there. But you are nonetheless self-employed, independent contractor. Vow of poverty applies. Information is so important that it has to be repeated so that people don't get the wrong idea, because that is my task, to emphasize that there's a right way to do things and a wrong way to do things. Therefore, here it is once more. Vow of poverty applies only to those who are self-employed, not W-2. And vow of poverty is 100% tax exempt. If the religious entity has assigned through a separate document that shows that your ministry is to apply in all facets of life, you can delegate it specifically or just use a blanket term just as such. Any type of work relating to income, quote unquote, use those words, shall constitute your ministry, where you fill in the blank and then put some verse from whatever spiritual belief or theological text that conforms with your spirituality. So now that we clarified what vow of poverty applies to and what it doesn't, let's continue. So ministerial service basically lets you know that it is anything designated and required by your religious order if you are self-employed. Ministerial service in general are the services you perform in the exercise of your ministry, in the exercise of your duties as required by the religious order. So they give you a leeway. They don't limit it. You can define what ministerial duties are and what the requirements are. See that beauty? Wonderful. The system requires you to be self-sufficient in order for you to enjoy certain perks, or in the exercise of the duty of profession is whatever, which is particular types of religious entities. Income you receive from performing ministerial service is subject to self-employment tax, which is automatically letting you know that you must be an independent contractor, because anyone who is an employee of a religious entity, because if you take a vow of poverty, you're saying I'm giving my money to a religious entity that I have fidelity to before anything else based on my religious instruction and belief. Therefore, you're essentially working for them because they have designated you to act in a certain ministerial manner and provide said service. And that said service is a prelude, it predates, it preempts any other service you provide. And the status of self-employment to that religious entity, in order for it to match other type of ministries outside of that religious entity, has to be self-employed. Very important. It's no different than having a deed. There are many different types of deed to a real property. You cannot give the deed that you don't have. You can't have a quick claim deed and trying to issue a warranty deed to someone else. That's the equation. And it emphasizes it by only speaking about self-employment tax. Income you receive for performing ministerial services is subject to self-employment tax unless you have exemption. That exemption is the vow of poverty. Even if you have an exemption, only the income you receive from performing ministerial service is exempt. So they're emphasizing here to let you know, look, whenever they designate or require you to perform ministerial duties, make sure that whatever it is you're doing, particularly when it comes to making money, must be part of that required or delegated or assigned duty as being part of your ministerial service. The exemption does not apply to any other income. This part is where most people fuck up, for the lack of a better term, because the language of the document that designates them, separate from the vow of poverty, the language that designates ministerial service is not all encompassing to every other aspect of your life when it comes to income. Now, as a side note, before we continue, the IRS recognizes that some entities don't use Social Security number, religious entities particularly. This is another reason why you can open a 508 bank account, because some religious entities renounce using Social Security number. And they even implement some of that into their instructions. Election by church to exclude its employee from FICA coverage. FICA is federal insurance coverage that's tied to the Social Security number. So if it's a religious member who doesn't use the Social Security number, that means they don't qualify for FICA. So if the religious entity has other people who qualify for FICA, they can elect to not qualify for FICA based on religious belief also. Churches and qualified church-controlled organizations, aka church organizations, that are opposed for religious reasons to the payment of Social Security and Medicare taxes may elect to exclude their employees from FICA coverage. If your employer makes this election, it doesn't pay the employer's portion of FICA taxes or withhold from your payment your portion of the FICA taxes. Instead, your wages are subject to SECA, self-employment, and you must pay self-employment tax on your wages if they exceed $108.28 during the tax year. However, you can request an exemption from self-employment tax if you're a member of the recognized religious sect as discussed below, which might make you think, okay, wait, is the vow of poverty not enough? Do I still have to fill out another form from the IRS? Nope, you don't. Exemption from self-employment SE tax. You can request an exemption from self-employment tax if you are a member of the clergy, minister, a member of the religious order, or a member of the recognized religious sect. And then gives you a note. It says, generally, members of religious orders who have taken a vow of poverty are already exempt from paying self-employment tax, as discussed earlier, which we read. So I'm reading all these different dichotomies for those who might have doubts in their mind because they might have heard something or even read something else. I'm just going straight to the point of what benefits you and how you do it. But nonetheless, I'm showing the other dichotomy and then comparing it to you to show you that, look, this is the real deal here. No need wasting time doing other stuff. And usually those other stuff just puts you into another unnecessary chain within the business master file and individual master file the IRS have. Whenever you have anything that is not form bound, like how the 508 is created and how other things are created, such as the vow of poverty and the pledge card and things like that, those are the best when you function outside of form bound exemptions. And then they affirm that you don't have to fill out any name of particular form 40, 29, 68, blah, blah, blah. Just create an affidavit and create a proper record. That's called being organized, hence religious organization. Handle your own affairs according to First Amendment religion, First Amendment speech, and First Amendment association. That is the key. But of course, there would always be another side to it, such as the 501c3, that is always form bound to get the exemption, to be created, to do this, so on and so forth. Moving on. So now here you are. You have a work and you finally figured out the power of religious entities and you go, oh my God, I can actually do this. Absolutely you can. But you are a W-2 employee and you want to apply a vow of poverty. IRS website, https://irs.gov/publication 517 P517-EN_US_2023_ pub link 1000333528. Services for non-religious organization. Remember this form we've read right here. It's publication 517. The summary of it is provided on the actual website outside of those who don't want to read these publications, even though I recommend both. Service for non-religious organization. Again, so now you've realized, oh my goodness, religious entities are that powerful. I can do this, I can do that. So I can remove a certain percentage from my paycheck from not being taxed. But oh wait, there's another thing called vow of poverty, which is 100% exemption. Oh, I'm going to do it. Well, let me bring your attention to this. Your services for a non-religious organization are ministerial service. If the services are assigned or designated by the church, we've already went over this. So again, there has to be a document that does so. And most importantly for this particular document, let it be all encompassing in your life. Don't limit it. Assigned or designated services qualifying if they don't involve performing sacerdotal functions or conducting religious worship. Sacerdotal function meaning something just rituals in short. And your pastors interpret what the Bible is saying to you and how you're supposed to live your life. Those are sacerdotal functions. Or you're standing there in the middle of the street telling a crackhead Jesus will save you and just love one another because you know there's some childhood stuff going on with them that they're trying to relieve the pain by doing crack. That's sacerdotal function. So it doesn't necessarily have to be inside a fixed building called a church. It can be anywhere. So outside of that formality of preaching to the choir or conducting religious worship, of reading the Bible and singing poems and stuff like that, if your services are not assigned or designated by your church, they are ministerial services only if they involved performing sacerdotal function or conducting religious worship. Services that aren't part of your ministry. Services that are not part of your ministry. Services that are not part of your ministry. Income from services you perform as an employee that are not ministerial services is subject to Social Security and Medicare tax withholding under FICA, not SECA, under the rules that apply to employees in general. The following aren't ministerial services. Services you perform for non-religious organizations other than the services stated above. In other words, if you are performing a service that's not based on self-employment, because there will be a conflict. You can't be double taxed like that. Self-employment and employment tax, aka FICA. So one or the other has to apply. Therefore, if you're a W-2 worker, that's not considered part of the ministry. All encompassing language can be designated onto you as the minister from that religious entity when it comes to your ministerial service. But if the ministerial service is based on you as a W-2 employee, aka you get FICA tax automatically, that itself act as a wrench within the will and the system of vow of poverty. Services you perform for non-religious organization other than services stated above. Services you perform as a duly ordained commissioned or licensed minister of church as an employee of the United States, blah, 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 blah. If that's not clear enough, or if it was just vague, and it sounds like I'm just making something up, let's keep listening to them. Effect of employee status. Effect of employee status. Ordinarily, an IRS has a definition for necessary and ordinary. So when you see this term, it means something. It's not what you think it is when it comes to your normal use of words. I don't know if that part of the course will be before or after this, but you get what that means. Ordinarily, if your services are not considered directed or required by you by the order, you and the outside party for whom you work are considered employee and employer. In this case, your earnings from the services are taxed under the rules that apply to employees in general, not under the rules for services performed as an agent of the order. This result is true even if you have taken a vow of poverty, not under the rules for services, meaning services is seen here as you are independent and you are not bound by being someone else's employee, but a contract is created by you and that third party to provide your service because they need your service. And of course, you will have taken a vow of poverty. You'll have been designated that these services that you're providing to all these other third parties are part of your ministry. But if you come in as a W-2 employee, then there's a conflict of who claims you, in short. And those who you'll be working for as an employee would want to claim you through Social Security, aka FICA. So you are not self-employed. And therefore, the principle of vow of poverty and not being dinged goes out the window. Again, if your services are not considered directed or required of you by the order, you and the outside party for whom you work are considered employee and employer. In this case, your earnings from that services are taxed under the rules that apply to employees in general, aka FICA, not under the rules for services performed as an agent of the order. This also emphasized the importance of that first designation, of that first assignment from you and your employee. If this last sentence here was not there, then we could say that all is good. But then they put it here by saying this result is true even if you have taken a vow of poverty, which is the second link that is required for 100% amount of monies to not be taxed. So now you see how they split things up? Had this last sentence that I'm highlighting here, had it not been there, we can still say, oh, okay, so all that's still required is the assignment and designation from that religious entity, aka religious order. And you can be a W-2 and be fine with it. And you can show them and say, look, don't charge FICA because my original employee is my religious entity and this work that I'm doing here is part of ministry. But the IRS publication we just read required two things for 100% of your earnings to not qualify for tax, which is the designation and the vow of poverty. And here, which is the reason why I recommend you read the stuff on the website and the publication, here it tells you, look, even if you sign a vow of poverty, if you are an employee, this doesn't apply. It doesn't give you an example. And this is very important. Pat Brown and Chris Green are members of religious order and have taken vows of poverty. So Pat and Chris both took the vow of poverty. They renounce all claims to their earnings, which is what makes it exempt. It's now going directly into the bank account and name of the religious entity. The earnings belong to the order. Pat is a licensed attorney. The superiors of the order instructed. So we already know in order to instruct someone when it comes to what we're speaking of here, it all has to be written down. Instructed Pat to get a job with a law firm, meaning a third-party employer. Pat joined a law firm as an employee, and as requested, the firm made salary payment directly to the order. No big deal. Now the second party, Chris, is the secretary. The superior of the order also instructed Chris to accept a job with a business of the church that supervises the order. So now the instruction for Chris is don't go to a third party. Go to another business affiliated with the church. I want you to see this difference now. In other words, Pat is under a status of a W-2, and Chris is not a W-2 and still retains the status as a self-employed personnel. Remember what we said earlier, when you work for a religious entity, you're classified as a self-employed party. And the self-employment here is the key, the emphasis being made here in this example. As a self-employed personnel, remember what we said earlier, when you work for a religious entity, you're classified as a self-employed party. And the self-employment here is the key, the emphasis being made here in this example. As a self-employed personnel, remember what we said earlier, when you work for a religious entity, you're classified as a self-employed party. And the self-employment here is the key, the emphasis being made here in this example. Pat joined a law firm as an employee, and as requested, the firm made the salary payment directed to the order. Cool, not a problem. So they both took vow of poverty, as mentioned earlier. Chris is a secretary. The superior of the order instructed Chris, just like they instructed Pat, to accept a job, but this time with a business office of the church that supervises the order. The emphasis here is that the status of self-employment is still retained. Chris took the job and gave all earnings to the order, just like Pat. It then goes on to say Pat's services aren't duties required by the order. Dun, dun, dun. Pat's earnings are subject to Social Security and Medicare tax under FICA and federal income tax because there's a conflict. There's no self-employment going on. You have to have a self-employment tax in order for vow of poverty to apply, to cover that amount of monies completely. So they can send the monies to the name of the entity all they want, but you don't want to find out the hard way that yes, they send the money to the name of the entity, but IRS is saying you didn't report your stuff because, well, it's a FICA status that you're using to earn that monies. Vow of poverty only apply if you're not using a FICA status, aka W-2 employee, to earn that money. The system benefits you when you start to engage in self-sufficient things. And in the age of technology, our parents, most of our parents, did not have technological luxury. See, we inherited a system that allows us to do things remotely and connect with the world with what we can do instead of traveling 4 hours to go meet people and do stuff, even though you're likely still going to be required to travel and engage in meetings. But for the world to see what you got to make money, technology is there. It is appalling when you sit down and think the opportunity people have that we have in the age of technology. Everyone that's walking around in today's world should be an entrepreneur just because of this technological luxury we have. But then again, everyone has distractions in their lives and things they're focused on and just may never get there. And in fact, may never even find what they can do to become self-employed. So what makes self-employment attractive is the lack of being dinged. The reason why you see some people stick onto religion so much, like the Federalists, like the Amish, like the Jews, like some Hindu Indians, like some quote unquote Arabs, it's because they know these things exist this way and they can effectively remain outside the system while the system still benefits them. This is what I mean when I say the system is designed perfectly because it is designed to benefit you. But that only exists if you know the importance of self-sufficiency. Chris's service are duties required by the order because his tax status is still based on self-employment rather than FICA, which is an umbrella of socialism that links you to everyone else inevitably. Whereby your FICA is paying for that homeless man wearing Jordans with the most recent iPhone that's tracking him and is doing machine learning. Your FICA is paying his link card. Chris is acting as an agent of the order and not as employee of a third party. See, this thing called agent is determined properly when you are not beholden to someone else as their employee. So long as you're still an independent contractor to a third party, that's when you effectively are able to play the role of the agent from the religious entity to that third party. But if you're not an independent contractor and you are an employee, then you cease to be an agent. That is very important. Very, very important. Chris's service are duties required by the order, and they go on to tell you why. Chris is acting as an agent of the order and not as an employee of a third party. Chris doesn't include the earning and gross income, and they are not subject to income tax withholding or to Social Security and Medicare tax under FICA or SECA. Pat, though, well, it's obvious. Very, very important. Here now is the summary of everything we're about to read. These are the elements, these are the standards, these are the tests, and these are the overall essence involved in involved poverty that we have just read from the IRS website. What we're going to read now are basically everything that explains the summary of element, standard, and tests. So let's get to it. Minister's vow of poverty by itself not sufficient to exempt income from tax. As we just read, you should realize that the vow of poverty itself is not sufficient. It's the self-employment status and the designation. If the designation exists and the vow of poverty exists, but the self-employment is not there, then the vow of poverty still means nothing. Very, very important. The Taxpayer in White versus Commissioner TC Memo 2016-167. This is how the IRS tax court labels their decisions. Looked back to a 1919 IRS ruling in support of his position that his payments from a church was not taxable to him due to having taken a vow of poverty. And what is a citation form that most taxpayers likely have never seen? The taxpayer cited OD blah blah blah. As the court noted, a clergyman is not liable for any income tax on the amount received by him during the year from the parish of which he is in charge, provided that he turns over the religious order of which he is a member all the money received in excess of his actual living expense on account of the vow of poverty which he has taken. This right here should be part of the verbiage that you put in the designation. I'll say that and I'll leave it there. While some may be thinking this might be one of those where someone is, quote, ordained in a, quote, church of their own creation, this is not the case here. The case does involve someone with a long history of church work. So they provided his resume and accolade that, hey, he's been working for the church for 30 years and he's been doing stuff, go to Africa, build houses, all that crap. However, the taxpayer did decide his relationship with the church should be restructured, as the opinion continues. In 2001, petitioner recommended WEOC, which is the religious entity, Board of Advisors, that WEOC be restructured to include a corporation sole as an office of the church. The Board of Advisors unanimously agreed with petitioner's recommendation, and on October 5, 2001, a domestic nonprofit corporation sole of WEOC registered as, quote, the office of presiding head apostle of blah, 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 was created in the state of Nevada. Although the corporation sole was registered as a Nevada entity, WEOC continued to operate in Florida. This also affirms that you can have a certain entity registered somewhere, regardless of whether you're using it as a side or not, and still do business outside of that particular state. On November 27, 2001, petitioner signed a document entitled, quote, Vow of Poverty, detailing that he agreed to divest his property and future income to WEOC, and in turn WEOC would provide for his physical, financial, and personal needs. That was where he made a mistake. By resolution, this last part right here, and in turn provide for his personal need. But he couldn't have known this until after the fact. So the key to life, that thing called life hack, is learning from others. By resolution, WEOC resolved in part that, quote, the church accepts and will provide all his needs as apostle of this church ministry. WEOC shall pay his housing, all ministry expense, and any other needs for his care. This is where they fucked up. WEOC established an apostolic bank account, and petitioner had signatory authority over this account for his use. The tax court, however, did not agree that in his situation that a minister who takes a vow of poverty and receives payment from the church for his support is exempt from taxation. Why? The court noted that the 1919 ruling he cited was superseded by 1977 revenue ruling with the court, which the court notes. Listen to this last part is the key. Revenue Ruling 77-290 in 1977 supersedes, states that income earned by a member of a religious order, aka the minister, and on account of service performed directly for the order or for the church with which the order is affiliated and remitted back to the order is in conformity with the member's vow of poverty, is not includable in the member's gross income. All right. And was the case with the taxpayer in Cortez and Rogers. The critical difference in this case is that petitioner did not remit income to WEOC pursuant to his vow of poverty. Petitioner had signatory authority over the WEOC apostolic bank account, and the payment WEOC made on his behalf served only to benefit petitioner in meeting his living expense. Now, if we go back to one of these elements that I show here, where I say there must be others within the religious entity that is superior to the minister's agency in order for the capacity of, quote, agent to be favored as legitimate, meaning whatever bank account that you are putting money to, someone else as a member has to sign there. Whoever the signatory of that bank account must not only be you. Someone else must be a signatory. Whatever bank account you are designating the money to, assigning the money to based on vow of poverty, someone else must be the signatory. That way it doesn't look like, oh, well, it's just for your benefit because only you can withdraw money. And if you realize that you and someone else signed as a signatory, then create another resolution that says that you are not to use the monies in there for your benefit and add it to the bank's file. These are details, subtle details that make all the difference. Very important. So besides those caveats of FICA and SECA, here's another way it could be pierced. You must learn from it. Petitioner had signatory authority over the WEOC apostolic bank account, and the payments WEOC made on his behalf served only to benefit petitioner in meeting his living expense, which is the fact that they limited the scope of what they did. The compensation petitioner received from WEOC and the form of payments WEOC or its related entities made on his behalf must be included in his gross income. Very important. I'm showing you this caveat that whatever bank account is getting that monies, if you know that you have to be a signatory, of course, it's best for someone else to be a signatory to it, someone you trust. This is why it's called a trust, a 508 trust, an express trust, so and so, a trust. If you know you are going to be a signatory to it, then ascertain that a separate meeting, a separate resolution, which is a third one. So besides the one that designates you to do ministry outside of the church and everywhere else in your life, and besides the vow of poverty, which will also be embedded in form of a resolution or a minute, there should be a third one placed into that bank account as you are opening that bank account that says that you, if you're a signatory to it, particularly just you or anyone, must not use it, and this bank account is not meant to be used for personal purpose. And in fact, when you open bank accounts, they ask you questions like that. But it's best for you to create your document that shows it. Very, very important. Documentation is the key. I'm showing you these keys when it comes to how people preserve the integrity of their monies. And I'm showing you an example of those who have failed. Learn from it. Here now is the standard test and element of vow of poverty. A federal appeal court rejected the minister's attempt to avoid taxation of his secular income by taking a vow of poverty and, quote, assigning his income to a religious order. A man, the defendant, was designated as a minister by a mail order religious order, took a vow of obedience and a vow of poverty, and transferred title to all of his property to the order. Okay, cool. So you keep seeing the consistency that you merely taking a vow of poverty is not enough. There has to be certain operations involved. He also assigned to the order all income earned from his secular employment, either endorsing their employment checks in favor of the order or directing his employer to deposit his earning directly into various accounts for the other order. The minister's home, now owned by the order, was designated as a personage, and his mortgage and other expenses were paid for by the order. Cool. All right. That's just the background. The order's minister's handbook, which the defendant drafted, states, when ministers take vow of poverty, even the IRS recognizes that they have no income and that any income that they would receive belongs to the religious order. If a minister under a vow of poverty has no income nor assets, then it will be futile for someone to sue them. If a minister has no income, then there is no income tax. That's what was added as part of their minutes. A federal district court ruled that the minister's secular employment resulted in taxable income, and this ruling was affirmed by a federal appeals court. The court considered that secular income may be exempt from income tax and self-employment tax if a person is a member of the religious order who, one, now they'll listen to you, the standard of how vow of poverty would work for you. One, who has taken a vow of poverty, cool, received earning for services performed as an agent. See this agent? That means self-employed from the third party. Agent of the order and an exercise of duties required by the order. And three, renounces the earning and gives them to the order. The court stressed that the tax code, quote, provides tax exempt status to a minister earning only when the minister earns the income as an agent. Only when the minister earns the income as an agent. The court stressed that the tax code provides tax exempt status to a minister earning only. The tax code provides tax exempt status to the minister's earning only when the ministers earn the income as an agent, self-employed, when it comes to the third party, as an agent of the church and not in his individual capacity, meaning not as a W-2 employee. Very, very important. Very important. So what do all self-employed contractors have in common? They have entities. That's what makes them self-employed. That's what separates the individual capacity and makes it self-employed, because there's an entity they're working with, because there's their own entity that they're working through. Whereas an individual W-2 is using their employer as the entity they're working through. An independent contractor, aka self-employed, already has their entity that they're working through before they start dealing with other third party. And your own entity you're working through, you know what that is? That's that religious entity that created a designation, an assignment for you to engage in ministries and other aspects of life. Do you see this now? It's not just me interpreting what IRS says. These are res judicata's. Very important. In deciding if a minister is receiving fund as an agent, they keep emphasizing that agent thing. As an agent of a religious order, meaning you are still an employee of the order that designates you to perform certain ministries. Therefore, as an independent contractor or self-employed, You'll be showing the religious entity's information, the religious entity e-number, all that stuff. Right. Right. You'll be going into that religious entity's bank account. No different than as an individual. They'll tell you in the direct deposit form, they would ask for your social security number, ask for your account and routing number. Right. In this case, you'll be showing the EIN of the religious entity that assigned and designated you, that you've given your vow of poverty to. You'll be showing the religious entity information's e-number. Simple as that. In deciding if a minister is receiving funds as an agent of the religion order, the court considered various factors pertinent to the relationship between the religious order and the minister, between the minister and the third party employer, and between the employer and the order, which is the same thing here. So now they're going into the test. The court concluded that the relationship between the defendant and the order, quote, provides little evidence to support the conclusion that he acted as an agent of the order in his employment, aka if you are a W-2 employee and the religious entity is not involved in the contract that you're doing with that third party, then it is considered an individual capacity rather than as an agent. Very, very important. The defendant claimed that he was formally, quote, assigned by the order to his secular job, and this made him an agent of the order with respect to his secular employment. Yet he was a W-2. That's the problem. He was not an agent. You see? You not only have to be assigned, you not only have to do a vow of poverty, but the status of self-employment has to persist, because vow of poverty to not be taxed 100% at all, applies to self-employment status. Because that vow of poverty saying, oh, my money is going to the religious entity, aligns with the fact that the religious entity is the medium to which you are readily employed and you're just doing something for someone else. And when they ask you, okay, how do we give you this money? Oh, here's the direct deposit information of the entity. No different than a regular business man or woman says, oh, I have an LLC. Here's the bank account information of the LLC because, well, I'm a shareholder or an employee of it. Same principle. But in this case, you're not getting taxed. Agency rather than individual capacity. Self-employment based on your fidelity and using a pass-through entity rather than a W-2. Self-employment based on your fidelity and using a pass-through entity rather than a W-2. You see now? You'll be using a religious entity as a pass-through for the purpose of not being dinged. The defendant claimed that he was formally assigned by the order to his secular job, and this made him an agent of the order with respect to secular employment. The court disagreed, noting that the agency assignment simply directed him to continue in his present employment. And nothing in the record suggests the agency assignment should be treated as anything other than illusory, meaning he was already a regular employee, and now he just created a vow of employment and a designation and automatically says that's it. No, the way you enter into a contract with a third party has to be presented as, okay, here's the entity, which is the religious entity that you'll be paying to, aka as an agent, aka as self-employed. The defendant was already employed by a secular employer, meaning he was already a W-2. First in time, first in line. When he became a minister of the order, which was retroactive, secondary, and there is no evidence that anything about his employment, with the sole exception of the payee on his employment check, changed as a result of his ministry. His testimony reflects that he simply continued as usual with employment and that the order has never exercised control over the work he performed. The only way the order or the religious entity will exercise control over the work he performed is when he present before the employment contract that, hey, I'm coming as an independent contractor. I'm not going to be signing a W-2. Therefore, you'll be writing a 1099. And here is the direct deposit information of the religious entity and the EIN, aka the E number. Do you see what's going on? W-2 is the death of most people's ability to be free from tax. But there's still a way whereby each paycheck you can cut a huge amount off from being taxed, which I've shown in that webinar. This one. There's always a way. The court concluded that under the anticipatory assignment of income doctrine, quote, when income is assigned to a third party before the moment of receipt, the income is still considered earned by the assigner if he retains dominion over the income generating asset, meaning the one who you're working through must be the entity that you're assigning to, not you're working personally and then someone now is acting as the one you're working through, which is your employer, and then you're assigning the monies to a religious entity. Not that. And here the defendant retains control over the generating asset, meaning W-2, individual capacity, because he had the unfettered ability to direct his employer to deposit his salary into his own account instead of the orders. Where he also fucked up was he didn't even do what I mentioned, which is you're supposed to take the direct deposit and put it into the religious entity's bank account directly. He was taking it, putting it into his bank account first, and then giving it whatever it is that's left to the entity. And he's trying to say, well, I did disavow poverty. They assigned me. So, I don't qualify for tax. No. For his employer to give him that check in the first place, they already took FICA out. They already snitched on him. Whenever any tax is taken out, they snitch. They fill forms out and give it to the IRS. And that's the loophole right there. They must not snitch to the IRS through FICA. That's one of the things that makes it not qualify. And self-employment. Very, very, very important. Hey, I'm inviting you to come join the Patreon page. Not only do you get access to documents, posts, and videos that you will never find on any other platforms, you also get instant access to webinars that otherwise will cost far more. And we speak of things that usually we would not be able to speak of on any other platforms far more freely. On top of that, you get the opportunity to send me monthly questions along with everyone else's questions, so you can see other people going through similar circumstances. You never know. What you think might be a stupid question is quite often very valid. On top of that, you get access to monthly question and answer archives from several years back from people who have gone through it and people who are going through it. Get information regarding things you experience daily that you didn't even know you could take advantage of when it comes to business, work, or other personal things. There's a community of people where you can bounce information off of, and they can give you some tips and tricks based on what they're currently going through in their respective venues that you might maybe want to link up with. And there's a high likelihood you're not going to find them anywhere else. And you also get the access to directly send me messages. Oh, and also if you are a tier 4 member, you get access to yet another monthly meeting where we actually answer as much questions as we can, and we're between an hour and a half, and in some cases up to 4 hours. In addition to that, we also show some exclusive lessons that are not going to be posted on Patreon or anywhere else but the tier 4 meeting alone. So come forth, come join the 500